together.
Yeah. Where do you want to sit? Hey, they're pretty expensive. Might cut coffee, might be cheaper.
So we have a. No.
Sometimes you just gotta.
Good morning, how are you? I'm fine.
Yeah, I'd like to.
makes sense to us. Training my deck. Don't do that. No, I
Look like you're
I had my hip done there, and it was very, very, very good. Yeah, very good. I've had them all spaced around, that's why I was huge. Like these, but they almost look like shadow marks.
I always experience it crooked and I don't like when it's crooked.
How are you? Good. Or pearls, or sometimes they do lace. No, I'll pretend like I do.
I hear you want to go. I'm looking at that. No, I
I think you might be kicking it.
Destiny is a something. You know, it's a moving on, it's next chapter, but it was better than I thought. It was easier than I thought.
You just feed the process.
Do you need a pen? Here's a pen.
Okay. Are we ready? Can everybody hear me? Do I need the microphone? Use the microphone? Use the microphone. Test, test. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for attending our Journey Home seminar. We hold this every year about this time of year, and it's a good time to hear from our pastor and some of the other people in our community that help families prepare for or through the process as we always think about going home in our final as our final journey. So today we've got 7 speakers, and the format is going to be about 5 or 10 minutes of each speaker introducing themselves and then sharing what their area of expertise. And then we'll open it up for a few questions, but we do have to move on to the next speaker to try to close at 11 o'clock. If we have time at the end, as many of the speakers that are able to stay with us, we'll reopen the Q&A session. Okay? So I've prepared a notepad that hopefully everybody has. It's a booklet or a jacket that looks like this with the agenda on the cover, and then you got areas for notes on the inside for each speaker. So if you don't have that, just raise your hand and we'll get you one. But it's a jacket or a pamphlet that's got a notepad. So Father Evans and Julie have a funeral to prepare for today, so they're only going to be with us for a limited amount of time, so we're going to move them to the front end of the agenda, and I would like you to welcome Father Evans in an opening prayer and his talk.
Thank you, Mark. Let's pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
In your hands, O Lord, we humbly entrust our brothers and sisters. In this life you embrace them with your tender love. Deliver them now from every evil, and bid them enter eternal rest. The old order has passed away. Welcome them into paradise, where there will be no sorrow, no weeping or pain, but fullness of peace and joy with your Son in the Holy Spirit, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You know, I must admit, I'm kind of unique among priests. I actually do enjoy funerals. I know some find them depressing, but I tend to think, I figure, you know, every Sunday, every holy day, right, we all swear on oath. I look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen. Right? And our burial rites are where we put our money, where our mouth is, on that oath. Picture a small country parish. Larry had spent his whole life in that little town. He was such a good man. He was a good husband, father, and grandfather, very hard worker, daily rosary. The poor man got hit with cancer. I was a seminarian there on break. And Father and I prayed long and hard for his healing. But after some weeks, we could figure out it was not God's will. So once he went nonverbal, we started to pray the final commendation over him. Go forth, Christian soul, from this world. In the name of God, the Almighty Father who created you. In the name of Jesus Christ, his Son, who suffered for you. And in the Holy Spirit, who was poured out upon you. Go forth, faithful Christian. May you live at peace this day. May your home be with God in Zion and with all the angels and saints. And he did just that. Soon after he died, the body was laid out in the family living room. People kept coming and crying and saying, it's really here, it's really happened, I'm going to miss him. They shared stories. We prayed and read scripture about keeping watch. This was no time for denial, right? His body was right there. His death was a certain fact acknowledged by all. The next morning, the family in the casket showed up at the church door. So they brought the painful fact of Larry's death to Christ and to his church. We covered his body with the white baptismal cloth. And suddenly, to me, as a young theology student, suddenly Larry's death and Christ's death did not seem all that different. Both were good men and hard workers. It almost seemed like Christ was absorbing Larry into himself. And yet, it highlighted Larry's uniqueness all the more at the same time. After Holy Communion, Father incensed the body, honoring the fact that for 80 long years, that body was the temple of the Holy Spirit and would become so again. We then walked the casket to the cemetery right outside the church. It was winter and snowing. Everything was covered in white. It was such a beautiful day. Larry was placed with his fellow parishioners, and even deceased parish priests were in that yard. Fun fact, the priests are always buried with their heads toward the altar, while the parishioners are buried with their feet toward the altar. So that in life as in death, right, the one preached to the other, right, so that at the resurrection we will be able to face each other just like we're facing each other now. The following Sunday, I had the audacity to say to the widow, "You must really miss Larry." And she said, I do. She said, but he and I have prayed together in this church so much. Right? They had both lived there all their lives. Both were baptized there, confirmed there, married there, right? And so she said, I can easily feel his presence here. And of course, his body's right outside. Of course, she visited his grave every day until she joined him. I tell this as something of an ideal, right? It is not an ironclad law. Obviously, we are not a small country parish. We don't have a churchyard, right? I'm not saying that we have to do all these things. That was only one instance. But I do like to put the ideal before our eyes as we now proceed to discuss the more nitty-gritty details. Okay, you with me? Okay. So our funeral rites are a lot like our Easter Triduum, right? We have kind of 3 different services, but they're all linked. And it's really, you don't really have the one without the other. They don't really make sense apart. So the first one is the vigil, right? So of course, usually in these parts, we do the vigil at the funeral home. And that is where we confront the specific reality of this specific person being no longer with us. It is painful, it's meant to be painful. It also, that's the moment where we share our stories about our loved ones. The couple times I've been able to do a vigil with the family, it's to be buried in the Rock River in Rockford. And the widow was planning on simply just, dumping the ashes. And my predecessor had to kind of step in and go, no, we can't do that. And what they later found out was they called the city and they said, you cannot pour the ashes into the river, but if you get an urn that's heavy enough to sink, you could just drop the urn into the river. So that would be, so I don't know what the laws are on the lake. I haven't had a chance to check those. But if any of you are like, I really want to be buried in the lake, then, call City Hall and let us know, and we can do that. So, but yeah, so no scattering. There's a phenomenon, it kind of ebbs and flows in popularity, where they'll take portions of ashes and make things like keychains or jewelry. No, please, no. We do not do that. Okay, couple of other bullet points here. Looking at my time. I was told I had 15 to 20 minutes. And my first thought was, I can't go that long. Because I just, you can tell I'm not naturally that long-winded. But it looks like I'm getting close, so I'll speed up. Okay, so before death, right back to Larry getting sick, there's the question of life support. Right, now obviously, we utterly condemn the actions of a Jack Kevorkian. Right? We do not end life early. That said, when someone is in the hospital and they've got the ventilator is breathing for them, the pacemaker is making their heart beat, right? And there's absolutely no hope that either of those organs would work on their own. Right. The question, I ran this by my theological expert. Where is she? There, she's right there, sister. The question becomes, when are we prolonging life versus when are we prolonging death? Now, I'm going to trust you and your loved ones that you and they have not bought into the Kevorkian culture of let's just end it now the moment there's a bit of pain, right? Because obviously that is not the way Christ works. Just look at the crucifix. A couple of other issues. People have said to me, Father, my mother converted to Catholicism later in life, so the rest of us are not Catholic. What do we do? I love hearing that question. Right? We are happy to help. Mass, of course, is encouraged for the deceased, for any deceased Catholic, even if the children are not Catholic or no longer practicing. A little humility goes a long way. Right? I've had everything. I've had, Father, I haven't been to church in 40 years, but Mom said the rosary daily. Help me out. We're happy to help. Okay, so we do not condemn. So please encourage your descendants to not be afraid to come to us. Okay, a couple of others. Let's see. Okay, so eulogies, right? Remember when were the stories shared at Larry's funeral?
At the vigil.
At the vigil, right? Because that's where it really ought to be. So people say, well, why do you forbid eulogies? It's not that we forbid them, it's that we allow them, but at the proper time, right? They belong at the vigil. Diocesan policy is no eulogies at Mass. So before or after, but not during. So I've had it where, let's see, I've certainly had it at the vigil. That to me is where it's most poignant and beautiful. I've had it there, I've had them at the grave, right? So there's a little burial service, we bless the plot if it's not a Catholic cemetery. And then once the prayers there are done, someone will say, well, this was Dad's favorite poem. Just yesterday they told that I buried a man whose favorite song, among his favorite songs was Danny Boy. And they sang and played that after the burial service, and I was hard to hold in some tears. So I've also seen them at the luncheon, right? I had one family where they asked if they could do a eulogy. It's my former parish, and I said, well, is there any way we could put it at the luncheon, right? And my old parish is a lot like ours, where we have the hall here, and so the luncheon's right next door. And they said they were a little kind of surprised, and they went, okay, we'll do it. And then maybe an hour later, after we parted, they called me and they said, Father, Dad, every day at 5, Dad always had a PBR, a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. Could we, if we bought a supply of PBR that every adult at the luncheon gets a can and we toast Dad? What do you think I said to that? Yeah. Of course, right? And the 4 kids each did a toast to Dad, and they had their own little dad story, and it was so beautiful. And I remember thinking to myself, there's no way in you-know-where that this could have occurred in the church, right? And yet it became so much more beautiful. Let's see, what else? Oh, and I should say that we priests are very good at making the homily itself be personal. So that's another, I know people are, well, Father, are you just going to get up there and read the obituary? No, I've never read the obituary out loud. So yeah, so don't be afraid. We will make a nice personal homily. Okay, skipping ahead. Oh, before death, call me for anointing. Okay? Do not, I repeat, do not play chicken. Right? What's playing chicken? Waiting till the absolute last minute, because usually you know what ends up happening? Father, he just died. We're not really supposed to anoint dead bodies, right? So just when in doubt, call earlier, right? We do not worship a vindictive, vengeful God, right? I think there's also people that, you know, will if Father anoints a week before, then, you know, suddenly, you know, God's gonna, you know, abandon the guy. No, not at all. So if it's a week before the person dies, that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be right at that moment. Okay, after death, once death does happen, call the funeral home. That's another case where, you know, I've been to the bedside and the person has just gone. And then I get questions about, well, could we have a nice plush casket, Father? Right. Now, obviously, they're grieving. I'm not rude, but that is not a question that I can necessarily help them with. So, and we do a saying, and this is very true: the funeral homes know our funeral rites better than we priests do. They told me that in the seminary, and I thought, there's no way. Yeah, it's true. Right? They've shown us up. So after death, call the funeral home, who will then call the lovely lady over there, Donna. And Donna will meet the family to help select readings. And then the priest meets with the family for memories to put into the homily. And then also for vigils at the funeral home, so the night before, Donna will coordinate with the funeral home. And unfortunately, at this time, vigils and visitations may only take place in the funeral home. Our narthex is a little small, and with the Adoration Chapel, it's a little too cumbersome. So, okay, that is my portion. I will hand the mic over to, yes, the lovely Julie Herman.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Herman. I'm the Director of Music and Liturgy at St. Thomas. And I want to talk to you a little bit about pre-planning for your funeral mass. I know it seems kind of strange to pre-plan something like that, but I have a couple of reasons why I think it's important. And the first one comes because I speak with a lot of families after a loved one dies. And usually when your loved ones come in, they're really overcome with grief. They're really sad. And they're overwhelmed with all the different tasks they have to do. Because obviously there's a lot of steps that need to be done. And so it's really hard for the family to be thinking about maybe what your favorite songs are or what your favorite readings are, because they probably can't even at that moment think of what their favorite songs are, because they're just kind of, you know, too many things going on. The second reason is that maybe your immediate family members aren't Catholic, so they're not really familiar with anything at the church. They may not even go to church, and so it would be just helpful if you kind of did those steps for them so that they don't have to feel uncomfortable with not knowing what to do, and it would just kind of have that all done up front. And also, if your children maybe aren't Catholic and you haven't really shared with them your thoughts on this, then maybe when someone passes, they might just do what is comfortable for them. And they might think, oh, we're just going to have something at the funeral home. We're not going to go to the church and do a mass. And, you know, that could be something that you, of course, would really want as a mass. So by kind of telling your family up front exactly what you want, then you don't have to worry about them maybe doing what's most comfortable for them. Okay? So I gave you a packet. It's within your folder. It has the little Journey Home cover on it. And this is the sheet that when you do meet over at the Parish Center with Donna, this is the form that you would fill out. So I kind of recommend you can start to fill it out now. Obviously, you don't know the date of your funeral or the time of your funeral, but just
Don't plan that.
no, don't plan that. So you can kind of, on here, fill out some of the details. So you can see here it has a spot where you put your readings, and you can even say who you want to do the readings. Maybe there's certain people in your family that you would like to do that. You could even talk to them ahead of time so that they know that's something that you want them to do. You can think about who might read the prayers of the faithful, who might bring the gifts forward, and you can just kind of pre-fill that out for your family. But if you turn the page on that, you should then have a list of music selections. And that's the other part that I think would be helpful for you to fill out for your family. And I recommend this because my mom told me one day, oh, I hate Amazing Grace. I would never want that at my funeral. And I would have had no idea that she hated that song. And, you know, I don't know if I would have picked it, but some people may pick that song, and if you don't like it, then you're going to have it at your funeral anyway. So if you kind of list out your favorite songs here, and you can, you know, maybe just put stars by them as you think of the ones that you like, and then that would be all planned up for you. Keep in mind that when you pick music for your Mass, the selections need to be sacred. So Father mentioned about Oh Danny Boy. Obviously that's not sacred text, so we wouldn't be able to have it during the Mass. Like maybe you like Wind Beneath My Wings, or maybe there's some sort of pop song that people like. I get asked for lots of stuff that's very interesting. And I always have to say no, because it's just not sacred. And sometimes it's hard for people to understand that, but I always recommend, oh, have that played at the wake, or make sure you have that played during the luncheon if you do a luncheon. So that's kind of the best place to have the non-sacred music. You know, on occasion, maybe we would do it at something as a postlude. We might be able to sneak something in, but not during the Mass for sure. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? You also might want to put on there if you want an instrument maybe at your Mass, like maybe you like the violin or bagpipes, or maybe there's a special cantor at the church that you know that you would want to sing at your Mass. You might put that down as well, because your family members probably won't know that information. Maybe there's a priest that you prefer, and you can kind of put all that down too so that your family knows that. Just a little bit of background when the Mass is here. We have a resurrection choir that sings for all the Masses, so it's a group of volunteers that come and sing for the Masses, and it's really nice, especially for the families that maybe not everyone is Catholic and familiar with the Mass, because the choir stands up, sits down, kneels, does everything they're supposed to, so it kind of helps everyone feel kind of comfortable with what to do, and leads the songs if everyone else isn't singing. So they're great. It's a great ministry. We also make a booklet for the Mass to follow along, and it has all the responses in it to kind of help the family members that maybe aren't practicing Catholics and aren't familiar with it. I was going to kind of talk through the process of when a loved one dies, but I think Father covered most of it. One thing I wanted to touch on was we do offer a funeral luncheon here, so it's a wonderful group of women, a funeral luncheon ministry, and they bring all the side dishes if you wanted to have a meal after a funeral Mass, and it would be in the community center. And they, you know, put tablecloths on the table. It's very nice, and all the parishioners of St. Thomas bring in all the side dishes, and you just have to pay, is it $2 on a person? So $2 a person for the meat. So, you know, if you have 100 family members that are coming, oh, what is it? Oh, it's $3. There's one for members. Yes. So yeah, so it's $3, which is a great deal if you know if you're going to a restaurant or something. And it's real homey here, and it's, you know, wonderful and cozy here, and everyone was just in the Mass, and now they just kind of scoot over here. So that's something nice that we offer too. I think that's all I had. A lot faster than you, Father, sorry. Does anyone have any questions? Because I may have to duck out early because of a funeral today. Oh, yes.
We have a nephew or cousin that is very good with the violin. If we wanted him to play at our funeral, would that be all right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in case you didn't hear it, the question was, if you have a family member that maybe plays the violin or maybe sings or does any music thing, can they participate in the Mass? And we almost always can allow that. So I always recommend if the person says, oh, I have someone that's going to play the piano and sing, usually then I'm like, well, do they play at a Catholic church all the time? Because if they don't, most of you know, that's kind of hard to know when to come in for all the different Mass parts. So I always like to have at least one person that kind of knows the ropes here at St. Thomas, but definitely we have family members come in. It's always really special when they can participate that way. Yes?
I just have a quick question, probably for Father Evan. My nephew is the pastor at Old St. Pat's Church down in Chicago. Is he allowed, could he come here if it was my husband or I?
Yes. So the question was, could you have a visiting priest from a different church come and do your funeral mass at St. Thomas? And Father said, yes, that would be allowed. Yes?
Do you allow grandchildren to do readings in second grade or not?
I don't know if we really have particular rules on that. Usually for Mass, we like them to be a little bit older. Part of the reason is they're probably going to be really sad, and to get up and do a reading could be really difficult for a little child at a funeral Mass. So I would probably say they might need to be a little bit older, but that's something we could talk about and discuss. But I think like second or third grade, that might be best for bringing the gifts forward instead of doing a reading. They're going to be 20 by the time that comes, right? Yeah, so then I think that could probably be an exception that might be made then, yeah. That is the hardest part though. A lot of times when family members want to participate in the Mass, you don't really realize how difficult it can be to sing and, do that when you're grief-struck yourself. So, sometimes it's best if it is someone that isn't really tied to the family because it can be difficult to sing when you're really sad or weep. Any others? All right, well, next up is...
If there's another question,
Yes.
I have a question really for Father Evan. You'd said cremation is not the preferred, but yet probably 10 years ago when I attended something like this, it was like it's allowed. Is this something the Catholic Church is going to change their view on? Like some of the stuff in Mass, they flip-flop back and forth, or no, this is how things are said? Is it going to be maybe at some point not allowed?
At this point, you're asking me at this point to speak for the Pope, which I hesitate to do. Remember, part of the struggle between us Americans and Rome is, remember, our country is based on British law, right? Because of course we were a colony, and British law, I'm told, is a barbed wire fence. Right, so you can go anywhere within the fence, but don't try to touch that fence. Right, Roman law is more like, if ever back in the day, your kids say they want to go out and play, and you say, okay, you can go as far as you want as long as you can see your house. Right? So Roman law is more like, okay, here's the ideal, and okay, we might have to at some point kind of go back from the ideal, but that ideal is always going to be the ideal, and we don't really veer from the ideal. So in that sense, I don't foresee it being explicitly forbidden to cremate, but I don't think we'll ever necessarily say, oh yeah, that's better than burial. I don't. Right, again, we'd have to face the martyrs of the catacombs, right? If we said, oh yeah, cremation's fine, we can't really do that. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, so the cremation is more like the secular, there's not enough room, so now we have more room for people.
Yeah. And don't, I mean, it's, when we say we don't prefer it, right, don't think that, you know, it's not like when someone, I mean, the funeral I have now is gonna be with cremated remains. It's not like the family member's gonna show up with the urn and I'm gonna go, yeah, I mean, like, right, it's not gonna be that. We don't sneer, you know, it's just, there's the preference, so.
What do you do with the cremated remains if you don't put them in Crystal Lake?
So what to do with the cremated remains if you're not gonna throw them in Crystal Lake? Basically treat them like a body. So there are mausoleums, there are cemeteries, so any of those kinds of things.
Can I say something?
Please.
No, okay.
She's
I like
with
to share of this, what we will do with it. I usually tell my patients when they choose cremation to tell the family really what you want to do it. It's not about doing the cremation because then, so, oh, I want to be cremated, and then there's nothing else. So treat it as our body is special. We're made in the image of God and His likeness. Going on the mountain and spreading it abroad is really not being respected that way. So that was an example I gave to them. This woman was as mean as anything you can think of, and then has strength from the family, and she wrote that she wanted to be cremated. After that, they left the ashes. Just so you know, I may say, oh, I love my loved ones, I'm going to keep the ashes. Yeah, I love them, but I'm going to die. My children are going to die, and then who's going to, eventually the ashes get trashed, not being respected. If it gets to people that don't even know us. So like Father said, it's preferred, but not really, you know, I tell them that and that. If you can bury, why not? Like we go to all these places and we see the catacombs, like Father said, I've been there. I want my children, I want my friends to come. And if I become a saint, yeah, they go. They go see me, they're not gonna go to mountains, start looking for me. That's my perspective. Just respect it if you can, you bury it, but if you cannot, it's another option. Thank you.
I have a question. There is no church law saying that the ashes have to be buried. I know you prefer it, but there is no church standing on that.
No, the ashes have to be treated as a body. Yeah, so sorry, the preference is full body burial, right, so non-cremation. What is an ironclad law is that the remains, whether they are cremated or not, have to be disposed of appropriately. Yes?
If someone does want a cremation, is there a preference as to the body comes to the funeral or the ashes come to the funeral? Is there a...
You're reading my mind. The preference is that the body would come, that cremation would take place after the funeral. Right, so I believe our funeral home representative will explain. I believe there is something like casket rental where you bring the body. Yeah, so that it is preferred to have the body in that case.
Thank you. And again, if we move along, we'll have more Q&A session toward the end. I'd like to introduce Kim Nordin. And Kim comes to us as a funeral director with Davenport. Yes. She's a second-generation funeral director and lives in Cary. Active in the community and kids' schools, and grew up in Menominee, Michigan. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Let me just say that when we get a new call that someone has passed away and they request that they are working or they're a parishioner of St. Thomas, we kind of do an inside cheer because it's so nice when we can just call Donna and everything works so well, and everything is so organized, and the luncheons are great and everything. You're very well taken care of here at this church, so you're very blessed. I'm going to just touch on a couple things. A couple things have already been talked about. But I'll just kind of go over from my perspective. I'm one of the funeral directors at Davenport. There's 6 of us girls. So if someone in your family passes away, chances are you're going to get a couple girls that come to your home. And Jack as well, he's our boss and he's in it with us as well. But being that there's more numbers than us girls, that's who you usually get. But you'll be very well taken care of from start to finish. So when someone passes away, so I believe we're going to talk about hospice a little bit today, or nursing homes. If you are at home and you are not, the person is not under hospice care, the first thing that you're going to do is call 911. So if it's a sudden death and you're not under hospice, you call 911. The police will come. I believe you'll get some, like an ambulance or something, but there's protocol on that end, but that's the first thing that you have to do because the coroner has to get involved. And then, but if you're under hospice care, then the hospice, they will, walk you through everything, and they will be the ones that call us. So if you're not under hospice, you call 911, and then you can also call us as well, but then we will also be notified by the coroner, and we can come. If you're at a hospital and someone passes away at the hospital may say that they will call us, but don't always take their word for it. We always suggest that you also call us as well. Because sometimes the hospital gets busy and they don't, and the next day, the family will call us and, ask us questions and we don't know anything about it. So we always suggest that you give us a call as well if you're in a hospital situation. So the next step is we will come to wherever that person passes away. So we'll come to your home. It doesn't matter what time of the day or night, we will come to you. If it's a hospital, we'll come to the hospital. So a nursing home, we'll come to the nursing home as well. So anywhere that you pass away, that's where we're going to come to get your loved one. And at that time, or a little later, we'll give you a call and we will set up a time for you to come to the funeral home, and we'll have a meeting with you, and we'll, you can bring some of your family members in, whoever you'd like to have come with you, you can bring. We always suggest that you don't come alone. It's always nice to have at least one person that comes with you. That's when we'll talk about the arrangements that you want. Or what would work best for your family. And in that packet, we just kind of gave you all of our options that we offer. And if you have any questions about any of that in there, just call us. You can call us anytime and we will be happy to walk you through anything and answer your questions. I know Julie touched earlier about kind of planning what you want. And that is also wonderful with your funeral. And that doesn't mean that you have to prepay it. Okay, prepaying is really good for your to do, but if you don't want to prepay, you can just come and meet with us, and we can get down all of your wishes. So you have a file, at the funeral home, and then when your family comes in to make those arrangements, we can just pull the file out, and we'll know exactly what your wishes are. So that kind of brings down some stuff that the family has to do at that time, because it's pretty emotional, it's pretty hectic, and we walk you through everything, but yet still there's a lot of stuff that we have to get through. So if a few things are down on paper of things that you want already, then that kind of eases some of the decision making that has to be done. So then at that time also, we'll talk to Donna and we'll set up your funeral mass. And I know that the big thing is cremation and burial. Here, I know that we do a lot of the traditional cremations, which is we bring the body here for mass, and then the cremation is taking place after. And then we'll, take that urn, either the funeral director with you, or you as a family will take the urn for burial. So that is an option as well, that if you do that route, or if we go right from the mass, we go to the cemetery with the body. So usually whoever you have meet with you at the funeral home, one of the funeral directors, we walk you right through the very end, whether it's, when you're picking up the cremated remains or burial, cemetery, the funeral director will walk with you, usually the same one, through the whole process. Okay? When it comes to setting your funeral mass up with Donna and Julie, you'll work with them for all the details of that mass. That's where the funeral home kind of takes a step back, and we do all the funeral, like the flowers and the cemeteries and making sure that the military is ordered. So we kind of take a step back from the mass itself and work through all the details on our end. But we do, when it comes down to like writing the checks out to the church, we will take care of that for you, so you won't have to worry about that. The cost of the church always goes on your final invoice for your funeral. So that's something that you won't have to think about, and that's kind of takes a little bit of stress off the family as well. So know that we will take care of that for you. I know she wanted to stress the no eulogies during Mass. I know that we've talked about that already, but that, during your visitation, if you choose to do a visitation the night before at the funeral home, you'll have a small prayer service at the end or in the middle where a deacon or a father will come say prayers, and that's a time also you can do eulogies at the funeral home. And then a lot of people today will do the visitation and service all in one day, or Mass all in one day. So that means we would be, in the morning for a couple hours at the funeral home. And we're just located just down the road a couple miles. So we meet there and we have the time of visitation. We do prayers, and then we'll process over here for Mass. So that's usually the protocol, is to start at the funeral home before Mass. And then we all come over here together as, family.
What is your average cost of a burial?
Of a burial?
Of a casket?
Well, okay, we have
Your average cost?
the average cost. Depends on the casket that you choose, and depends on if you do a visitation the night before, a visitation in the morning.
That you're doing a visitation and having the average casket, Mass the next morning.
It's going to be usually average $9,000 to $10,000.
And it's the average cost of a cremation.
It depends as well. So if you do a cremation after Mass, it's going to be just a little bit less, not much less, probably about $8,000, $7,000, $8,000. But then
And who does your cremation?
we do the cremation. So I, as a director, and all of us directors there, we do everything from start to finish with your family. So wherever the person passes away, we come. We meet with your family. We do the embalming and the dressing and cosmetics, everything. So we don't hire that out to anyone, or we don't even have a special person that just does one thing at the funeral home. We, as directors, do everything.
Cost, the cost, is the burial plot inclusive?
That's what makes the burials more expensive, and I think that's why more people are going towards cremation, because now you have the cost of the cemetery, and the Catholic cemeteries are not cheap in any way. So you'll buy the plot unless you have a family plot that was bought, in the 40s or 50s or 60s, which people still have. Then you'll save some money. You won't have to do that, but you'll still have to, pay for opening and closing of that. So that's where you get up towards the $15,000 because of the cemetery fees as well. And we aren't part of those fees. Like, that is completely separate than the funeral home. So in that case as well, if you knew that you wanted to be at, say, St. Michael in Palatine, or All Saints, or any one of the Catholic cemeteries, you can go there, and you can also pre-plan, prepay, so that can be something that you can ease up on your family members when it's time, if you know that you want to be buried. That's where the price goes up and up.
Okay, I was going to say, I buried my mother 4 years ago. The price was $17,000. My cousin was buried last weekend, and that price was $25,000.
See, that sounds way high. So it really, we can get
That's
in.
not including the cemetery.
Okay, that's very rare that we ever do something like that.
And it's nothing exceptional, like a very fancy casket or nothing.
If you have questions about all the pricing, everything is priced in the packets, but we can, like I said, always meet with you. Not that you have to do anything that day, but we can just go over anything and just answer all your questions. Yes?
What is the local Catholic cemetery?
The local Catholic? A local Catholic cemetery, yeah, that's in McHenry. Mhm.
Woodstock has Cal.
And Richfield, one on Richfield.
Calvary.
Oh, do they?
I already
Okay.
have.
Okay, perfect.
I couldn't hear that.
Okay. Now, we can get a list for you if you wanted to have a list of all the Catholic cemeteries in the area. Yes, sir?
Our plots, our cemetery plots are in Colorado. If something should happen to one of us, would you have the ability, or can you work with, I guess, taking care of the stuff here as well as shipping the bodies?
Absolutely. So
Colorado?
we're actually doing that today. We do that quite a bit, whether they're coming up from another location to us or we are sending out. In that case, you only have to worry about calling us directly. So we can do everything 100% with the funeral home where you'll be going services out there if you just need the burial. But we work very closely with all different funeral homes. And so we have the family, we usually stick with the family run because Davenport is family owned and operated, which is a big, huge plus, which keeps the cost down. So, you know, depending on where your family was, that sounds more of the corporate. So we're family run, and when we work with other funeral homes, then we make sure that they're family owned and operated as well. But we can work through all the details where you would only have to really deal with one funeral home. Yeah, so even if you were on vacation somewhere in Florida and something happened, you know, call us and we will work through all those details for you. So never think that you're on your own, you have to figure things out and Google things. You just call us and tell us what's going on and we will walk you through everything. Yes?
When you have a cemetery plot, it doesn't matter if it's cremation or full body. It's the same, right?
Not necessarily, depending if you're buying it as a cremation lot or full body. So usually you can get 2 burials in there if one is a body burial, and you can usually do a cremation on top. So some families do that, and then if you buy 1 grave, you can put 2 cremated remains in there as well. So that's depending on the cemetery, so that's a good question for them too. But so say if, you know, someone in your family wanted to be buried and then full body, then one, say the wife wanted a cremation, they can still go in the same grave, and that saves some money. But it's always 1 body per grave if you're doing full body burial. Unless if you say you are a veteran. A veteran, we have Abraham Lincoln Cemetery, which is in, by Joliet. I can't think of the word where it is right now. It's right next to Joliet. It's a beautiful cemetery. There, you are eligible to be buried there with your spouse free of charge. So if you are a veteran, that is something to think about. And we go down there quite a bit and get all your honors, and you get to be at Abraham Lincoln. Any other questions?
I just wanted, you had said sometimes you have the vigil like before the mass and stuff, like the same day. Are they doing that more and more, or is it if you're older and there's not as many people coming or out of town, or?
It just depends. So like if you have a small family, if you know it's not going to be very big, or if you have, say the living spouse maybe is just too, you don't know if they could do like a whole, like a 2-day process, like a 4-day visitation and come the next day and do the, you know, do more. A lot of people are doing that all in one day. It saves some money, and it gives you a couple hours for the visitation or the vigil, and then we come to mass. It just depends also on that if you are going to a cemetery. So usually the cemetery times of when we have to be there for a burial will alter or kind of predict if you're doing a 1-day or a 2-day funeral service.
Question.
Yes, ma'am?
So with the cremation and the thing, like you were speaking about bringing the body to the church and then it's cremated afterward for the funeral mass at the church. The question is, can they bring the ashes to the church and forget about that body in the church? Is that happening?
It is happening. Like Father Evan said, it's not preferred for the church to do that, but people are doing that, more and more. So you can either have the mass with your body present, cremation after that, or, or bring your urn for mass at a later time. But they just, I know, stress that the body, if you're going to have a mass, the body has to be present, whether the cremator remains or the body. Yes, ma'am?
Is it possible to take an urn on the plane?
When
and
you are
take it
flying
home?
with that, you'll need to have it in a container that they can see through, like with their,
The X-ray?
X-ray. Yes. So we suggest to have a wooden urn or to carry that on in a temporary container and then transfer to an urn when you get to your location.
Okay.
The temporary container, square box.
Yes. Yes.
When they bury your remains after you've been cremated, do they bury the urn or do they just bury the ashes?
No, you're buried in an urn. So that's a requirement of the cemetery, just as if you're going to bury a full body, a casket, that casket has to be in a vault or a grave box. Okay, so the casket goes in the vault, the lid goes on the vault, and that's what is buried in the ground. And that keeps the grounds level at a cemetery, so you're not caving, you don't have like the older cemeteries where it's very uneven. That keeps the ground level. So when it comes to an urn, also, we have burial urns, which are cultured marble, and they're very heavy, but they are urn and vaults together. If you did decide just to, bury like any kind of urn, you would have to have that urn in an urn vault. So you can't just take any urn and bury it at a cemetery. So it has to be a special urn.
Is there any state law where, say, a spouse dies and then wants to be put in the casket?
No.
And then, say like 10, 20 years later.
You can do
and then
that.
You take those ashes and put them in the casket.
You can do that. You just have to disclose that to the cemetery if you want to have that person's name on the stone. What was the question? The question was, could you bury cremated remains with inside a casket when the other person passes
The
away?
other spouse dies. If the first spouse dies and then gets cremated, and then the second spouse dies, they have a full funeral. And my mom and dad did that. My dad died in the room with my mother, and he was in that old temporary box on the shelf. And then my mother, his request was to go in with my mother, and that's what my father was Catholic. And we're all in church early on that. But yeah, the undertaker just said, my dad and my mom. And we have a headstone for their names.
Yes. So that has to be disclosed to the cemetery if you were going to do that. If you wanted to do
So you, as you know,
We do that. So we make this as personal as you want it to be, to make it as meaningful and honoring to your loved one. So when you think about planning the funeral, you think about your wishes, but then you have to think about the people that are going to be there. So a lot of people say, I don't want anyone to see me. I don't want any bells and whistles. But then you also have to think about if you have grandkids, if you have, kids that they need that for closure. So you have to think about what you want, and then you have to ask your family, what they will need as they say goodbye to you. Any other questions before I pass it along? We can talk about this at the end too. And like I said, on all this, if you have any questions at all, even if you think it's a dumb question, it's probably not. So you call the funeral home, the number on there, and we will answer all your questions for you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks.
That was very informative. And, we have got two speakers that are kind of outside of our parish, but still members of our community. So Kim, thank you for taking time, out of your day for this, and also for Chrissy Rebar, who's the marketing director for Fair Oaks, is our neighbor to the west. Chrissy has spoken to this at this event in the past, so thank you for coming back. And she lives in Woodstock. She's lived in Woodstock for 3 years, so Chrissy Rebar.
Hi there, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the healthcare options in the community. So I am with an extended care, also called a skilled nursing facility, or what you used to be known as a nursing home. Majority of people that come to Fair Oaks, or the community ones here at Crystal Lake, which there are 3 of them, would be majority short-term rehab nowadays. So most people that come to a skilled nursing facility would be coming for maybe your hip, your knee, any joint replacement, maybe a stroke, stage F, so any short-term medical needs typically. So people come to rehab 1 to 3 weeks at a skilled nursing facility, possibly longer depending on their needs. Have any of you guys been to a skilled nursing before? Yeah. Okay, maybe a loved one or someone. So, you know, there's different options when you are in the community and you need a little bit more assistance or care at home besides skilled nursing. And we'll kind of touch base on that, but I know you guys were talking a little bit about hospice for more end-of-life care. There are other options, you know, for before you need that route. So assisted living, maybe an independent living, things like that. So I'll just briefly kind of go over a few of those. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but if you guys ever have questions, my card is on the back table, and you can feel free to give me a call. So besides the short-term rehab at skilled nursing, we do have 24-hour care. So anyone that needs help with maybe just their daily ADLs or living, or they can't manage their pills anymore at home, or they just need that full assistance on their everyday needs. A little bit of difference of skilled nursing versus assisted living is assisted living has different levels of care. If you are living in a community as an assisted living, you can come and go as you like. So that's the difference versus a skilled nursing. You can't come and go as you like, especially if Medicare is paying. So we'll kind of go over that portion of that in a few minutes, but hospice, as you had mentioned, is more end of life. So if you're under hospice care, you can do that at home in your own environment. You can do that at hospice community or skilled nursing or assisted living. All of those do allow hospice to come in. Have any of you guys had a loved one on hospice before? Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with how that works. So as she had mentioned, if someone does pass away on hospice care, they do everything for you. There is no worry of planning. Same as if you're at a skilled nursing, what we do is we do contact 911 first, and then they would contact the funeral home, or our nursing staff would, and they come out directly on site. As for payments for those kind of options, so anyone that comes under skilled nursing, Medicare typically does cover that. Anyone that has a Medicare replacement would also be covered, and then anyone that has like a Blue Cross or a Humana or United Healthcare, a lot of times they cover those just for temporarily. Anyone that does stay longer than what Medicare guidelines are, it does become private pay. Another option for skilled nursing is if you don't have those funds, you can apply for Medicaid, which is the state funding. A lot of the communities in the Crystal Lake area do take the Medicaid as well. Hospice typically is covered under your Medicare services, especially at a skilled nursing setting. What is not covered is the room and board. So anyone that comes in under long-term care at Fair Oaks or one of the communities in Crystal Lake or any surrounding area, you would be responsible for the payment of room and board, but hospice would cover everything else. So hospice covers your cost of medications, any services that you need under that care, and any special equipment needed. A lot of assisted livings in the Crystal Lake community also are private pay, but they do take the Medicaid as well. And if you have like a long-term care policy, that is covered under those typically. Do any of you guys have questions about anything?
Is there a difference in hospice where you get it from as to the care?
Not per se. So every hospice company offers hospice services the same. Some might offer like a palliative care, which a lot. So palliative care and hospice, palliative care is kind of early on stage. We like to start that, like maybe someone comes for rehab, but they need just a little more assistance at home. We can set you up on palliative care, and they just come into the house more.
Okay, so palliative care is not hospice.
It's related with hospice, but it's not full hospice yet. So it's like the beginning stage of hospice.
Hospice facilities, okay, can also, because we call hospice, so people think when you call hospice is the end. Hospice offers also, there's options that hospice, and one of the options are palliative care. Palliative care is, for example, if someone is going through diabetes and something that is not curable but is manageable, to prevent you from going to the emergencies and being admitted to the hospital. So that's why the palliative care helps, because you'll be still attended by the doctor or nurses, but at home.
Yeah, they provide.
I had a very bad experience with my mother at the hospital.
Okay.
All they did was come in and take her off all her meds, and all they gave her were meds. She was a heart patient.
Okay.
All her heart medication away. All they gave her were painkillers, and they did nothing. They didn't bathe her. They didn't dress. They did nothing for her. They would come in and take her blood pressure or whatever and leave.
Okay, so maybe that was the company you were with.
So
You know, there's several companies in the area, especially in the McHenry County. There are probably over 30 hospice companies alone. So what I always recommend, even for a skilled nursing rehab stay, I recommend you tour the companies that you're interested in, you tour the buildings, you contact, their marketing director, and ask to speak to director of nursing at times as well, and kind of get your concerns answered and make sure each company offers those. As my cup of tea, being a skilled nursing, I encourage families to tour any facility that you're interested in. We are all so different. Fair Oaks is a small home-like community.
service where they came in.
Yeah, and that's what hospice does at home. They come to your house. But if you're at like a skilled nursing, it's extra services that come in when they're with us. And if you end up going into like the inpatient hospice center, it's a lot more intense of aggressive treatment that they would provide for families.
And it said that don't call 911 when something happens. You call us.
Yeah, because when someone's on hospice, they typically don't go out to the hospital. It kind of depends on the situation, but usually people that are on hospice, they try not to send out to the hospital, only because they like to treat it at home for comfort care.
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Remember that if a patient, for example, wanted to be comfortable, and then that's what it shows. So what hospice does, one of the options, is to make you comfortable. So when you choose to be made comfortable, they are not treating, but they are making you comfortable by lessening your pain until the natural taking comes. But remember that this is the wish and will, which can be reversed. If you feel that written it doesn't mean that it's written on a stone. If you feel that this is not what your loved one wants, or maybe things are getting better, because hospice is not the end of the road. What can go in and out of the hospice, and that's why it's good to start on time. I'm not sure if you're getting what I'm saying. So when you get to hospice, it's making you comfortable. That's why they don't take you to the hospital, because you already signed up to be comfortable. But you can also change your mind if you feel that that is not what, is happening.
Yeah, like
You then go to the hospital.
at Fair Oaks, like she said, you can change your mind. So like we've had people that have been on hospice at home and they had a fall and they broke their hip per se. They revoked hospice to have the surgery and to come for rehab, but then once they get better and they get back home, they go back on hospice services. But on hospice services, you can't have surgeries, so you can revoke it and have those surgeries, especially if you're in pretty good health per se, and you know that you still want a pretty good active life. Some people choose not to have the surgeries if they're already on hospice because they have that more, end of life road. But it kind of depends on each person. Each person's so different. People are on hospice sometimes 5 years.
Right, mine
You know.
was on it for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Cancer. And I thought my mother was getting
Yeah. So every person is so different, and every company out there offers different services and different levels of care. It's important when you are looking for, good care to maybe go on the CMS.gov website as well and look at star ratings, look at their nursing ratings, and look at their state regulation ratings. All that is public knowledge.
To be on hospice, you had to, it was imminent that you were to die in 6 months. Yeah.
It used to be, so hospice used to be kind of like that, more end of life, but hospice kind of has broadened their spectrum in the last couple of years. So you have to have certain diagnoses to even qualify for hospice, but some people are on hospice for several years. Yeah. Like we have a lady who's been with us years, and she's been on hospice for 2.5 years. But I mean, it just depends on each person. And there are times that you may qualify for hospice, and you start the hospice and everything, and then a year goes by and they come and reassess you, and you've actually improved. So then you no longer qualify under the hospice diagnoses, and then they'll take you off of hospice too.
Would that be when maybe you get the palliative care?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people come in just with a palliative care consult that maybe has a lot of CHF or multiple hospitalizations in the last 3 months for cancer diagnoses or something like that, because it's just that extra level of care that they'll receive. So, any other questions? All right, thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we might let our guests, Chrissy and Kim, get back to their day. Are there any other questions before we move on for Kim or Chrissy? And let's give them one question. Yes?
Might sound like a dumb question, but if somebody goes into hospice, is that something that I have to pay for, or is it something that the state pays for, or how does that work?
So typically with hospice, if you have Medicare, typically it's covered everything except the room and board. So if you go home, it is covered hospice. If they go to the inpatient hospice unit, it is covered. If you come to a skilled nursing community, it's covered besides the room and board. So you would pay the Fair Oaks room and board, and then hospice would cover the cost of medications. If they're on oxygen, if they're on any special equipment, hospice would cover everything besides the room and board.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, let's give a thank you applause to our one person that I got to speak with here with us is Sister Apollonia, one of our parishioners, and I didn't realize that she was recently named the chaplain for Northwestern Medicine. So, Sister, I thought I would ask you a couple of quick questions. In your experience, come on up here. Let's get a good look. The families that you work with as chaplain, and the very difficult time that the family is going through. You and I were speaking earlier about how important it is that you're here and you're thinking about these things, ahead of time, whether it be for yourself or for a family member or a friend. How easy it is for the family to find joy or find, start their, experience this in a joyful way instead of breaking the family apart. Some of these questions that we're talking about create angst, with family members. So, can you talk about your experiences and how important this is?
Yes, I can. And like you said, I'm like a flying nun in the hospitals. I work from Huntley, Woodstock, and McHenry. So I have had a lot of experiences in end of life, in as much as we plan afterlife, because most of what we are talking about is planning afterlife. And there's what we call the end of life too, and which is not everybody that that are lucky to do that, because most of the times people, when they die, the process, they're no longer coherent. They don't, they're not alert, and maybe they're not decisional. So it is at that time that the family member began to execute all the things we are talking about on their behalf. So I've witnessed so many times in the hospital where that becomes a burden in the family. And not only that it becomes a burden, it tears family apart. Because when we say, oh, mom said this, oh, dad said this, you know, and then instead of the sickness or the death of the loved one, bringing the family together, it's tearing them apart because we didn't prepare. So sometimes we do, like I think somebody will be talking about will and trust, we do all this stuff, but we don't communicate. Sometimes people come to the hospital and we ask them, do you have power of attorney? When they're still alive, because we know in the near future the doctor is going to do what? Pull them out in case if there's anything. They say, oh, I did it in 1970. Where is it? We don't know. So those paperwork or those is not to put in under the table or bury. It is appropriate to discuss these things. Like I told him, I said, I was thinking that here will be further. Once you're 18 or older, you begin to think about these things and share to your loved one what you want. And periodically update them, because I may be sick today and I feel terrible and I feel I'm dying, and then I go to the lawyer and do healthcare power of attorney, and that's it. And then I get better again, I forget about it. This could happen, one can get into an accident. So when we fill out this paperwork, we do what? We communicate to the appropriate person. Remember, you're making it, I'm not gonna steal you, but I still have to talk about it because I work in the hospital. We are expecting you to discuss not only with your healthcare power of attorney, but discuss with your family. What that health power of attorney does to us and the hospital is just to identify someone. That's the major thing it does. The doctor is not going to say, oh, what is it in the paper? No. Because at the time of incident, I may say, I don't want to be resuscitated, for example, but in the time of the incident, is my friend or my daughter that is there, I could have changed my mind. And then when you're brought to the hospital, the doctor, oh, what did he say? What did she? No, we are asking who is the healthcare power of attorney. And the doctor will say, blah, 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 blah. What do you want us to do? So inform them, call them, make meetings, talk about this. This is the reality of life. So that at the time of the incident, it will be easier. It has never been easy. But it will be easier. Remember what we do for the death is not really for the dead, it's for the living. If we're able to put this together on time and talk to our loved ones, it'll be easier for them to grieve appropriately. And again, if, for example, my mom wants me to resuscitate her or do not resuscitate her, as long as it is what she said, whether it goes south or west, I respected my mom. But if she didn't tell me, I had no discussion, and then I go right, and something happened, I will blame myself forever. I will feel guilty. I would have done this, I would have done that. But if I did, and it goes south, it's easier because that's what mom wants. So we see this a lot in the family. Sometimes we see the security men taking them out because they are fighting, oh no, and then the loved one is there impaired, and some of them will say, oh, sister, can we have, I want to have time, you know, just to see if he will get up and talk to them and tell them what is going to, you know, how he or she wants to. So it's very important that we begin to talk to our loved ones what we want, and we change our mind, we tell them and encourage others, because, and again, what I have to say is, if you have confusion about that, please talk to people. We have lawyers, we have hospitals. St. Deborah offers healthcare power of attorney free. You can walk in the hospital and do it. Like I said, it's not written on a stone. If you ever want to change it, just walk to your primary doctor and have it changed, or walk to any hospital and they say, I'm here to do the power of attorney. The social worker or the chaplain will come out and have that done with you. Any question? I'm here, I belong to this parish, so stop me at any time I'm asking questions. Yes.
I don't know, is there a new form for healthcare, for assignment of picking your person to represent you in the church anymore, for your health, for medical reasons, for power of attorney,
Yes.
for healthcare? Is that form different from what it was, like you said, from the 70s?
No, okay, you answer that. Yes. Yeah, it's the different forms. What we use, maybe if I said this, you correct me. What we see now is people have will. Will is different from the power of attorney, but it's not only what will doesn't name anybody to do that for you. But the power of attorney names someone who can do it for you if you're not able to help yourself. And again, this could be in and out. It's something that you can happen, you know, you go in surgery and then something happen and the doctor is asking a loved one, power of attorney, what to do. And whenever you regain your strength to talk or discuss, you take it over. So, yeah. So yeah, it's different. They keep changing, and it's on the website too. The paperwork is on the website. And sometimes people get confused about the will and DNR. The will is, he will talk about it, but the DNR is different from having will. We have actually DNR paperwork that says practitioner order. The doctor has to order it. I can say I want to be DNR. Yes, that's what I want to be, but I am not until it is ordered by the doctor and signed by him. Then that's when you are DNR. So it's different.
Good.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sister. Good segue to our next speaker, Justin Hanson, member of our parish and the stewardship committee. And Justin will talk to us about the power of attorney, the legal considerations, and get over to Justin.
Thanks, Mark. So, Sister Apollonia stole the first half of...
I do your job at the hospital.
So, I'm here to talk about estate planning, which means wills, trusts, and the like. And my start to my talk was essentially saying why you should care. And the kind of morbid way to talk about it is because eventually you are going to pass away. And if you want a say after you pass away about what happens to your assets and how they are distributed, you need to make that clear really now. So if you want to have a say after you're dead, you need to have an estate plan. It's the most morbid and clear way to talk about it. But if we want to make that sound a little nicer, an estate plan ensures that what you have will go where you want it, how you want it, okay? An estate plan ensures that what you have will go to the people you want it in the way that you want it. And that is not only to your benefit, so that you have that say, but as Sister Apollonia made really clear, is to the benefit of the people that you love. Never have I ever encountered a set of clients that came to me and said, our parents had a really clear estate plan, we are so upset about that. I have had multiple clients come to me and say, we don't understand what is supposed to happen now, there was no estate plan. Or the estate plan is unclear, or it's not enforceable, or so on and so forth. And so from a very pragmatic perspective, having a clear plan that is legal matters a lot, both for you and your loved ones. And I can say from personal experience from some grandparents, the personal angst of dealing with family issues after someone passes and not knowing what that person wanted, not knowing the fairest way to split it up, is really hard to deal with. And although you might sit here and think, well, it's really easy. I have 3 kids. It's going to go a third, a third, a third. Why do I need to put that down on paper? I guarantee you it will not seem so clear in the midst of your passing with all of the other pain and anguish that is part of the mourning process. So, for your own benefit and for the benefit of the people you love, you should have an estate plan. What do we mean when we're talking about an estate plan? Like, what are those documents that frequently get talked about? And what I get a lot of calls, or I get people that say, I want a will. That's accurate. You do, in fact, want a will. You are correct. But a will is one part of most people's estate plan. And a will is simply a statement of what we just talked about. A will is a written piece of paper. We follow certain formalities. We have people witness your signature. It's notarized, and it effectively says, this is what I want. I want this to go to this person in this way. It's bequests is the way that we used to think about it. I bequeath my, 1990 Rolls Royce, I bequeath my Mazda to my oldest born kid, that kind of thing. But the will is only one part of that. But when you put those sorts of wishes into a will, you are informing your heirs and the court, if necessary, how you want your assets distributed. The other thing that you put in your will is guardianship for your kids. If you are at an age in life when you have kids that are minors and you happen to pass away, the court's going to name a guardian for your children. You can establish that in a will ahead of time. Or alternatively, if you have a heir or someone that you are taking care of that is a special needs person, a dependent adult, that is also part of the will in your estate plan. In your will, finally, you name what's known as an executor. You name the person who has the pleasure of carrying out your wishes after you pass away. Oftentimes that's your spouse, if your spouse is still alive, but we typically name a second or third executor in the event that the person you thought might be alive has in fact died before you. There are other parts to most people's estate plan, and a common one is a trust. A trust, in the very technical sense, is just a way of owning property. But from a more practical sense, a trust is a way of owning property that lets you and your heirs skip probate court. And the simplest way to explain that is this. When you own property like a house, for instance, when you pass away, if you still own that house has to be transferred to somebody else, right? You can't own it after you pass away. And there's a couple ways that can happen. A court order, which means you have to hire lawyers, and you have to pay court fees, and it costs you money to get that to happen. The way to avoid that is a trust. So that what you do is you put the house into a trust now. The trust continues to live on even after you pass away. And so even though you have now passed, the trust continues to own the house, which means you don't need the court to transfer ownership of the house to somebody else. Another alternative is there's actually a deed that will transfer ownership of your property upon death automatically. So this trust, a deed that is transfer upon death, these are other things that are typically part of your estate plan. And like your will, you are essentially writing down ahead of time how you want that property to be distributed. So for instance, if you have a house here in McHenry County, you also happen to have a place in Wisconsin that you've loved and you want to make sure it stays in the family, you might decide that in your trust that the house here in Illinois is going to be split equally among my 3 kids. The house in Wisconsin is going to go to the oldest, but then she has to pay X amount of dollars to make sure that her brother and sister have a fair share. So something to that extent, so that you're ensuring perhaps that that property stays within the family and it's transferred in a way that you want. And without that, your heirs unfortunately will have the unpleasant experience of probate court. Probate court is that process that if you pass away and don't have an appropriate estate plan, it's the process by which the court figures out how your estate should be distributed. Probate is expensive, although it's not expensive because the court is taking a percentage of your money or something like that. Probate is expensive because inevitably you have to hire a lawyer, and we typically are not cheap, but also because Once you're in probate court, the court doesn't know anything about your family or your family situation. So you have to report to the probate court, which means you have to put together a full inventory of all the assets, and you have to report that to the court, and the court's going to look at it and make sure that it appears that everything is being transferred appropriately. And that's a long, intensive process. When I did this for my grandparents, it took almost 2 years. Now, granted, that was in Cook County, which was part of it. It just takes longer. But also it has to do with total lack of plan. And so we were constantly going back to court just to report what was there and how it was being distributed. It was a pain, and it was totally avoidable with an appropriate estate plan. So you might ask yourself, what is the typical estate plan? And the simple answer, I'm always a little cautious of giving, because everyone's estate plan is actually going to be different. What your needs are, what your wishes are probably different from the person sitting next to you. Even if that person sitting next to you is your spouse, you might have different ideas about what's appropriate, which is why you should be having these conversations now, and not when you're in the hospital on the cusp of passing away. Have these conversations now, where you can talk about it, and maybe fight about it, but come to a clear understanding of what you think is best for your family, and do that now, as opposed to later. But oftentimes, a typical estate plan includes wills for both adults. It includes an estate plan. It includes a trust. It will oftentimes include the powers of attorney that Sister Apolloni was talking about. Now, there's two kinds of powers of attorney. One is for healthcare and one is for property. Powers of attorney is simply a document that is legally binding that says, I, Justin, am going to give my wife, Cheryl, the authority to handle my property decisions for me. And we're thinking about property really broadly, like bank accounts, money, anything like that, okay? My healthcare power of attorney would say, okay, in the event that I am incapacitated, I authorize my wife, Cheryl, to make healthcare decisions for me. Or it might just say, anytime, I authorize my wife, Cheryl, to make healthcare decisions for me. But again, do that now, as opposed to waiting until you're in the midst of this medical emergency, and now you have doctors saying, okay, who's the person that's in charge? And there is nobody in charge. Not only are you making it easy on those people to know who has the burden of that responsibility, but you also are not going to allow for that fight among multiple siblings or multiple children about how that decision should be made. Another way to think about this is powers of attorney matter before you pass away. Okay? Powers of attorney only matter while you're alive up until the point of death. And what you are doing is designating that in the event the event that you cannot make a decision for yourself, here's the person I want to make it for me. Wills and trusts matter after you die. Okay? They don't come into effect until the point when you pass away. And you can change it up until the point that you pass away, with rare exception, as long as you're able to get through the normal formalities. So there are other kinds of estate planning documents that might fit your needs. There is such a thing as an irrevocable trust. So you're going to put this property or this account or this insurance policy into an irrevocable trust. And once that's done, you can't change it. The circumstances in which that's a good idea are fairly limited, but depending upon your situation, perhaps you're a small business owner, perhaps you're thinking long-term and you might have to go into a long-term care facility but don't necessarily want Medicare to get your assets. Those are sorts of situations in which you might look at an irrevocable, meaning an unchangeable trust, as opposed to the typical kind that you can change. Like I said earlier, you might think about guardianship for your kids, either as minors or disabled adults. And obviously you need to think about asset distribution. How much do I want to go to various kids? All these answers are going to change depending upon your situation and also where you're at in life. If the last time you thought about your estate plan, to use the number you gave me, is 1970, you should think about it again. Things have changed since 1970, not only legally, but also for you. I do have an estate plan now. I obviously have a guardian for my 3 young children. I have an idea that I would like my assets split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And obviously I want my wife to be the person in charge if I'm to pass away first, and vice versa. But 20 years from now, or even 10 years from now, that situation could be significantly different. My oldest could be a pediatric neurosurgeon who has more money than I would ever know what to do with, and at that point, I might consider that really the best thing to do is not divide up my estate 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I might decide to give a larger portion to charity. I might decide to take care of my children differently. Life will determine that your circumstances are different, and you might want to manage your estate plan differently. Make sure that somebody knows where your estate plan is besides the lawyer, right? Like, you don't want to be calling the lawyer that you think helped you with your estate plan while you're in the hospital trying to figure this out. You want to know where it is, and you want to make sure that the person you're naming to be in charge knows where it is, right? Like, this shouldn't be a guessing game towards the end of life. We want that to be very clear. So let's think about this and wrap up just a little bit differently, and I'll allow for some questions. Think about this like a range of options. On one hand, you would have nothing, right? We could walk away and be like, estate plan, I'll figure that out later, and then you don't. And when you pass away, the law of Illinois will determine how your assets are distributed. It will go to your spouse first, most likely, and then it will be divided among your kids equally. You will have no say whatsoever because you didn't plan before you died. You could have a plan. You could go home and just write it out on a scratch piece of paper, right? I don't need the lawyer. I'm not going to pay the lawyer. I'm just going to put this down, put it in the safe, and that's my estate plan. Probably not going to hold up in court. You will have at least given your heirs the benefit of knowing what you want. The problem is what you want might not be enforceable in court. So you might have created a problem for them by which you say, okay, I actually want this child to get 50% because I think he's going to do a better job of it. I want these two kids to get 25%, and I don't want any of them to have it until they're 25. If you just paper, it's not enforceable. A third option, which is getting better, is you can go online. There are online services, which I will readily admit, you can punch in certain information. I think they even offer the opportunity for you to talk to somebody. They'll prepare your estate plan, and you'll get it done. And in many cases, that might be cheaper than talking to a lawyer. I would guess that in most cases, that is better than nothing, and it is better than a scratch piece of paper that you did yourself. There's always a cost-benefit analysis, right? But I think what you want to be able to say ideally when you're done with your estate plan is you're able to say, I know exactly what this says, I know exactly why it says what it says, and I know why I paid X amount of dollars for it. And I think you do that by hiring somebody that you know or that has been recommended to you and you like. And in all honesty, that's probably not me. Short of this presentation that I give on an annual basis, I don't do a lot of estate planning. I don't keep up with the tax implications of estate planning. If you come to me with anything but the most simplest request for an estate plan, I'll help you find somebody else that's local that I think does a good job. So just so you know, I'm not really here in a self-serving sort of way. I'm not hoping to hand out a bunch of business cards and get a bunch of estate plans when we're done. I'm just doing this because I really do think this is an important thing. So think about it in terms of not only what Sister Apollonia said, but also, you know what you have, and you know who you have to take care of, and the best way for you to make sure that your wishes are known and enforceable is to come up with some sort of estate plan, and to do it now, as opposed to on someone's deathbed, or unfortunately, it'll be too late. Any questions?
How much is to get our attorney to the trust in the world? What is the average?
So I think in all likelihood, you're probably looking at somewhere that in a range of $1,500. I could be very wrong about that. If you were to hire someone locally, I think that's probably what you're looking at. Like I said, that might be low, I don't know. I haven't asked personally in a while. I think if you were to do it online, I think you're probably looking at somewhere like $750, maybe even a little bit cheaper than that. But when you're looking for an estate planning attorney, you should look for a free opportunity to talk to somebody up front, to give them an idea of what you need, and to get to know them, to see if you like them, if they seem trustworthy to you, although who wouldn't trust the lawyer, right? Make sure you like them and that they're good communicating with you, things like that. And make sure that they seem to understand what it is you're asking for. Ask them how much estate planning that they do, what percentage of their business makes up estate planning. I also think you should ask them, turnaround time. If you come in for that first meeting on November 10th, is it going to take until December 10th to get your documents? Is it going to take until November 10th of next year to get your documents? Ask those sorts of questions. Be comfortable with that person. Because no matter who you are, if it's gonna cost you $1,500, that's not a small amount of money. Make sure you know where your money's going, and why it's being spent that way. The other thing to hit on, and this also tags with what you were talking about earlier, is that certain forms, like a power of attorney, there's actually a state-provided form. There is a state law that specifically says, here's the form for a healthcare power of attorney. Here is the form for a property power of attorney. Although the lawyer is going to help you prepare a variety of documents, in all likelihood they are using the state-approved form for those powers of attorney. The reason for that is, when you get to the hospital and need to use it, you don't want the hospital second-guessing. Is this really authoritative? Can we really rely upon this? So if it looks like the state-mandated form, and it's signed appropriately in accordance with state law, it's much more likely to go through that process smoothly. Again, compared to like that scratch piece of paper where you wrote out, in the event that I can't make a decision, I want my wife to sign Justin Hansen. Not, doesn't convey the same level of authority that the state approved form.
If you have a durable power of attorney and a living will, and, all of the above in Illinois, and you move to Texas, do you need a new one?
If you move to Texas and become a resident of Texas, what you need to do is find out if your estate plan is valid under Texas law. If you vacation in Texas, or if you spend long periods of time there, but you remain a resident of Illinois, Illinois law will apply. But if you're moving to Texas, you need to make sure that your estate plan applies to Texas law. And my guess would be, like, if the situation was reversed, if someone came to me with an estate plan that was prepared in Texas, I would tell you to redo it under Illinois law. Because, again, we don't want to be guessing and having someone second guessing after passing.
What if you've been deemed the executor of an estate of, say, your parent or sibling or something, and that person is deeply in debt? Does that debt fall to you, or how is that realized through the?
That's a good question. So being named the executor of the estate means that you have certain responsibilities. It means that you are responsible for carrying out the wishes of the person who passed away, the person who wrote the will, in accordance with what their will says. Most of the time, what those wills say is, I give the executor the power to use, basically within the realm of good judgment. They can use their powers to do the following: distribute my assets to my heirs, whatever I have, pay my debts, etc., sell my house, etc., and close my estate. By taking on that responsibility, you do not take on legal responsibility for their debt. In other words, you do not suddenly become a debtor. You don't suddenly owe the money to those credit card companies or to the mortgage company simply by virtue of being the executor. What happens is, if I owe money on a mortgage and I pass away tomorrow, now the estate of Justin Hansen owes money on that mortgage. And if the estate happens to owe, making numbers up, $200,000 in debt, and there's only $100,000 in assets, someone's simply not getting paid. It doesn't fall to the executor to come up with the extra $100,000. Now, granted, your heirs in all likelihood are also not getting anything from your estate. The debts are going to get paid before you get to distribute to your heirs. But by being the executor and taking on that responsibility, you have not agreed to pay off that person's debts. That's not your burden.
If you have given power of attorney, say, to one of your children, and you end up with Alzheimer's or something that, they can't change your will or anything, can they?
The answer is maybe, which is always the best answer, right? Your powers of attorney can convey, it's my understanding, can convey someone the authority to change your estate plan. Although I think in most cases, there would be, not necessarily in full, I think is the best way to say it. Let's say you gave your son power of attorney over property. He cannot then go and have a new will written and sign that new will on your behalf, even if he follows all of the legal formalities, and suddenly what you put as a will is undone. he cannot do that. What that power of attorney can do, if it's not restricted in any way, is he could take that power of attorney and manage your assets now while you're still alive differently than what you might want, right? So if I name my son as power of attorney, and I also have a will that will matter once I pass away, the will's going to stay in effect. But if in the meantime my son empties my bank account and sells my car and sells my house using this power of attorney, the will has essentially been made ineffective because I don't have anything left to give to anyone. Now, which brings to mind two important things. Obviously, be careful about who you're giving power of attorney to. And second, you can give power of attorney in a way that it's not effective until you are incapacitated, right? So it's not effective as of November 3rd, 2018. It's effective upon incapacitation, which requires a doctor's order. It requires a doctor verifying that you are incapacitated, which can also lead to fights, unfortunately. But that means that if you're concerned about the person to whom you are giving power of attorney acting inappropriately, you can put that future event in place so that it's not effective until then. Does that make sense? There was a question over here, I think.
So if you have an estate plan done in this state and then you move to a different state, do you have to pay the same, if you have to redo it, do you have to pay the same big fee? Or is there a redo fee cheaper?
It's going to depend upon who you talk to. So the hesitation that most lawyers will have when modifying an estate plan that somebody else did is that they're essentially trusting that that first person's work was complete and thorough and then just modifying it accordingly. Now, you might find exceptions to that. It's really, the answer to your question is really going to depend upon who it is you're talking to in that other state. There's no good way to answer it. You might find somebody who's willing to modify the estate plan that you created here in Illinois to fit the law of whatever state you moved to, and you might not. And I can't tell you how much they would charge for that. It's going to depend upon geographic location and frankly who you're talking to. You could go to 3 people here in downtown Crystal Lake and get wildly different quotes for an estate plan.
So no such thing as a transfer?
Correct. I believe you are correct, right.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
2, if I have a power of attorney for property, can I put a limit on that besides the fact that until I am incapacitated? Can I put something on it saying like they cannot sell the house unless they have the approval of all the heirs to sell the house?
So bear
just in case.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
So bear in mind, your power of attorney isn't going to only matters up until the point you pass away, right? So if the house is being sold because that's what's in your will and you've already passed away, that power of attorney doesn't matter anymore. But if you're talking about the situation in between now and when you pass away, you can limit your power of attorney to only allow them to make certain financial decisions. And so you could specifically exclude and say, this power of attorney does not give this agent the authority to sell my house. You could say that in there. And honestly, that would be the safest way to prevent that sort of thing from happening. The more complicated it becomes, the harder it is to enforce. So if your power of attorney says, my agent does not have the authority to sell my house unless he also has co-signatures from heir A and heir B, yes, you can put that into a power of attorney. But when a bank looks at that, when the other parties involved in the financial transaction look at that, they're going to start questioning whether or not it's legitimate and whether or not all those contingencies have really been met. And it's just going to be a little bit less smooth, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. And
go ahead, what's your second question?
well, the other, it's more of a comment. When you have, if you're an executor for someone who has a lot of debt, just a comment, make sure you get enough death certificates, copies of death certificates available, because you've got to send a death certificate to every company that has
Yes.
any money
You-
outstanding.
So that is really good practical advice, and this is where people will hire lawyers ahead of time to help with estate planning. You can also hire a lawyer to help you with estate administration if need be. And some of that is simply very practical advice. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but very practical advice like Ann just said. When your loved one passes away, the funeral home will typically help you get death certificates. You want a whole bunch of original death certificates. You do not want just one. And the reason for that is when you're sending something in to credit card, Discover, to say this person has passed away, here's your notice, they're going to ask for a death certificate. They're not going to ask for a copy. They want to see an original. And you can always get more copies. You get more originals from the county, but just get a bunch up front and save yourself that hassle later on. The other thing I want to mention to Allison's question earlier is what I said before is true. Being the executor does not make you liable for the debt. However, if you have a power of attorney, like let's say you have a power of attorney for your loved one, for your parent, and your parent is starting to go downhill, and so you want to take it to the bank and make sure that they understand what's going on. I have seen where banks have suggested that rather than just using a power of attorney, you become an account holder with the other person, so that both of your names are on the account. And from the bank's perspective, that is much easier, but you will be responsible on that account for any debts that are associated with that account. So for instance, if it gets overdrawn to the extent of $2,000, guess what? Your name's on that account, and you will be responsible for that. Because you are not on that account now because of your power of attorney. You're on that account as a co-account holder. So although it's more efficient up front, that will actually create some liability for you. So beware of that situation. If you're just the power of attorney, just be the power of attorney.
By putting all your assets in a trust, does that eliminate needing power of attorney?
It does not. Because remember that trust is going to matter once you pass away. Okay? The powers of attorney matter now. So the powers of attorney say you're giving, daughter Ann the authority to make healthcare decisions for you, or the
But
power.
that's just for healthcare. A power of attorney just for healthcare.
There is also one for property.
Right,
Mhm.
but if you don't have a power of attorney for property, you have everything in a trust. The trust is the one,
That-
if you don't need a power of attorney.
I would disagree, and the reason for that is, first of all, your power of attorney is generally, unless you limit it like we talked about with Ann, unless you limit it to say there's certain financial transactions that person can't do, it's kind of a blanket statement that says this person can do what I need. It can help write checks, it can help with bank accounts, things like that. Generally, your trust does not contain every single asset that you have. So for instance, if you came to me tomorrow and said, okay, I have a house, a checking account, a savings account, and I own a car, the only thing right now that we're going to put into your trust is your house. Because the house is what, upon your death, needs a deed to be transferred to somebody else. Okay? So when you die, like let's say you sold.
But you can't put all those other assets into the trust. If you have savings accounts, checking account, or whatever, it can say the trust of someone.
Yep, you can do that. The issue is going to become, it's very difficult from a very practical perspective to put all of your assets into a trust. A car, for instance, retitling a car into a trust. You can't put bank accounts into a trust, but oftentimes banks will charge you more fees for trust accounts as opposed to personal bank accounts. And maybe your situation has been different. But having the power of attorney in conjunction with the trust means that you've covered your bases, because the power of attorney will allow for any financial situation whatsoever to be addressed by your agent, the person you've named the power of attorney. The trust is only going to cover those assets that you've put into the trust. Oftentimes, the other thing to remember is, if you're setting up a trust now and it's revocable, you can still be your own trustee. You can be the person in charge of your trust, so that someone else isn't having to make those decisions for you, and you're not having to rely upon them to make the right decisions for you, right? So when I can set up the trust of Justin Hansen for the benefit of Justin Hansen, and guess who's the trustee? Justin Hansen, right? So that for all intents and purposes, everything that's in that trust is still mine. I can still mortgage my house the same way I wanted to. I can sell my house the same way I wanted to. I haven't limited myself in that way. I've simply allowed for, upon my death, that house to be transferred without needing a probate court. So I think, to come back around to your question,
So then you don't need anyone with a power of attorney. The people who are have a beneficial interest in that trust doesn't happen until you die, because you are the trustee of the trust.
I disagree. I mean, I think a good estate plan has both. I think you have both a power of attorney to cover any sort of financial transaction in which you would need to make, but you're not able to. And at the same time, the trust allows you to put assets into that trust so that upon your passing, they can be transferred and then managed in the way that you want. I understand that the practical implication, there's some overlap there, but they actually serve different purposes. And so for my advice, I would caution you against relying entirely upon your trust to do the job of a power of attorney.
Okay, I think, I just wanted to understand this. I think what I hear you say is the power of attorney in that sense is the person who will be assisting to make sure that that trust gets to, because if you say trust, go to this person and that person, and put everything together. One person has to be the person in charge of making sure that everything is covered. I think that's where the power of attorney.
So
Yes.
right, and a lot of times, like if we came and set up an estate, what's that?
You have the executor.
The trustee is the person who runs the trust, right? It's like the executor of the.
Until you die, and then you're executor of that trust.
So you can set up trusts different ways. You can set up power of attorneys different ways. Oftentimes, if you are still alive and in good health and you set up a trust, you are going to be the trustee of your own trust. You're going to make your own decisions about the assets that are in the trust. A power of attorney, you have typically named somebody else to be the person to make those decisions for you. And the idea is you set that up to cover a situation in which you are incapacitated, right? Like you can't make your own deathbed, something like that. Your trust also generally has a backup trustee, so that if you're not able to make those decisions, whoever your secondary trustee is, that person can make those decisions for you. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name. What's your name? That's what Rosemary's talking about. Is there's some overlap there, right? Like if I have this power of attorney for someone that's able to make healthcare decisions for me or property decisions for me when I'm not able, in all likelihood, that's probably the same person who was also managing my trust, because usually that's the person you trust, no pun intended, that's the person that you rely upon and trust the most. But both of those documents, as I said before, I think those documents serve different purposes, even though there is some overlap there. And if you have an asset that is not in your trust, the trust will not give your trustee the authority to manage that asset. And that's where your power of attorney comes in. That's where your will comes in, once you pass it. Any other questions? All right, I'll hang out for a little bit in case there's any other questions at the end, but thank you for your time.
Thanks, Justin. Good. Okay, thanks for your patience. When Father Evan's the first speaker and he takes as long as he wants to take, not much we can do. So, hope it was informative. Just to bring this home, I wanted to finish up with a topic about our St. Thomas Heritage Society, which was created about 17 years ago with Monsignor Dan. Saw the opportunity that we have a great parish, and he knew that when he came, and he even made it better while he was here. And part of that, being the parish that we are, is because there's so many people living and deceased in our parish that have remembered St. Thomas Parish in their will and included them in their plan giving. So what I wanted to talk to you about 5 minutes, and then we're done, is a little bit about the Heritage Society that we call that is 3 endowments or accounts within the diocesan endowment program. So the diocese has an endowment program, and in other words, also called the Catholic Foundation. So the diocese has that foundation, And in that foundation, St. Thomas has 3 accounts. One for the parish, one for the school, and one for religious education. And about 25 parishioners, living and deceased, have named the parish or the school or religious education in their planned giving. It could be a one-time gift, or it could be a percentage or share of the will, or it could be a beneficiary of an insurance policy, okay? And any annuity of them. So the annuities have a corpus or an amount that the principal is never touched. Our pastor, with his discretion, can spend the interest of those that's made in those investments toward those 3 areas: the parish, the school, or religious education. And you can name them if you wanted to name, if you didn't want, you know, if you had a particular piece of your heart is toward the school, you could name the school in your planned giving. So the school has benefited from computers and lockers and desks as a result of the Heritage Society or the planned giving of our parishioners. The parish has undertaken some repairs of our buildings that our normal Sunday collection would not cover. Okay? So this is a gift that keeps on giving for the many, many gifts that we've received as parishioners of St. Thomas. And then, of course, religious education. There's our religious education is a very good ministry, and to a large part is because the giving, or the planned giving of many of these parishioners. So, Phil and Marianne Wayna, our guests right here, they've been Heritage Society members from day one, I believe. Is that right, Phil? I think so, yes. So, thank you. So we honor the Phil and Marion for remembering our parish and all the other Heritage Society members, and we remember them and celebrate with them once a year in June, just about the anniversary of our parish. The anniversary date in our parish is about the first week of June, and we have a memorial mass and a luncheon to celebrate that. So if you want more information about that, come see me or call Donna or Father Evans. We'll be able to give you more information. That was my piece. Is there any questions on any topic that we wanted to get out before we? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.